Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Free Your Story, Free Your Life, the interview edition. Today, I have another very special guest, Bill Barry. Just an incredible human being and also become a really great friend. He is a wealth, wealth of stories. I don't think I've ever met a better storyteller than Bill. Bill has stories upon stories. But not only does he have really great and engaging stories, he just has so much wisdom attached to those stories and those experiences. So, of course, I thought that he would be a perfect addition to the incredible human beings I've had on this podcast who have so vulnerably shared some very incredible moments in their lives, but not just that, they have shared the wisdom that they've gained from it and just have given so much encouragement to you all and obviously to me. And I've grown so much just through hearing stories because that's how we learn, that's how we connect, that's what makes life worth living, sharing our stories. So, Bill, we're going to start how we always do because I want to just know some general information for our audience to gain about you before we dive deep into your story. So, who
All right.
is Bill?
Oh, wow. Let's see. So I was born in Southern California and grew up there. Wrestled with a pretty serious heart condition. So I always thought of myself as a sick kid. And I guess I spent more days in the hospital in second grade than I did in school. So maybe I was the sick kid. I don't know. But as much as possible, my parents and doctors tried to never treat me like a sick kid and let me do mostly what I wanted. And I think it gave me a zest for life and a desire to go and do things because life did feel very tenuous in those early years. And fast forward, eventually I had a surgical procedure that corrected my heart right around the time I turned 18. And it was like getting my life back. And I thought, or getting it for the first time. I was 18 months old when I was diagnosed with a heart condition. Yeah, just tried to make the most of life and have some adventures along the way.
Yes. Okay, but you have to tell them the what you've done in entertainment as well, because that's another thing that I think that makes you so fascinating. So I'm biased because I know you, so I'm like, tell everyone what you do.
Okay, so as you know, and part of the reason how Amy and I got talking to begin with is she's such an amazing writer and editor and coach when it comes to these kinds of things. So she's become my friend and coach and just a really wonderful person to bounce ideas with. So I'm super grateful for that. And part of how I'm able to tell this story is all the things you've told me. But when I got out of high school, like many people who are not pursuing a traditional college education, I just kind of fell into the world and found myself working a whole bunch of part-time jobs and not really getting ahead. And then top that off with my mother had this great opportunity to move to a retirement community and I couldn't come. Next thing I know, I'm 19 and she says, "You've got 30 days to figure out where you're going to go." So I did what anyone would do in that situation when they're working 4 part-time jobs and getting absolutely nowhere. I quit all the jobs. Makes perfect sense. Moved out on my own, quit all the jobs, became an entertainer. That's what you do. Um, the first year was a tremendous struggle. I thought of myself as a performing juggler. And in that first year of all the shows that I did, I only did 2 shows where I actually juggled. The rest was twisting balloons or dressing up as costume characters. There was one time they hired me to be Big Bird at a party, and the Big Bird, I'm already 6'5", and the Big Bird headpiece, you look out the neck, and then the head sticks up like this far, and it's got a beak that's almost 2 feet long. And I didn't know, but every time the kids would go, Big Bird, I'd bend over, and the giant beak was pecking people in the head, and it was, but that was the first year, and a lot of struggle. But I trained and practiced and was able to do some really good things along the way, and that landed me a gig at a theme park. And next thing I knew, I did juggling shows 5 days a week, 6 shows a day for 3 years at a theme park, and that led to eventually working at Circus in Nevada and doing the midway there for another year and a half. And all that training, all that practice, ultimately led my juggling partner at the time and I to win the World Juggling Championships. And from that point on, our real career started. We began doing colleges, started doing cruise ships, military tours. We've done 11 military tours. And over the course of doing over 300 colleges across the US. I think I've been to 84 countries now, and all 50 states doing something I love. And naturally, when you take yourself out of your normal routines that much, you're going to experience some weird stuff. And about 20 years ago, I started taking notes on all those weird things. And I think someday it'll turn into probably several books.
Yeah. And we all can't wait to read them because it's like you're a local celebrity. You know what I
Oh.
mean? That's what I'm gonna love that. So today we're going to dive into what we usually do, which is things that we can characterize as trauma, but
Mhm.
really we're just diving into difficult moments in our lives that bring some darkness, but underneath the darkness is where we find our light. Actually, not underneath, mostly in our darkness is where we find our light. So you have a specific story among many that you can share, but we're going to talk about the story that you've chosen to kind of dive into. That was a particularly dark experience. So set the story up for us. What was going on? Who are you? How old are you? Set the story up, and then take us to that difficult moment.
I was growing up, I was in Southern California, living in Fontana at the time, and was still living in the first home I'd ever lived in. I was 8 or 9 years old, and we'd gone someplace for dinner or something like that. And as we pulled back, I should actually warn anyone listening: there's going to be blood and trauma and death in what I'm about to talk about, and I'm going to speak about it very honestly and freely. This was my experience, but you should be warned before I go into this. But we were coming home and we turned onto our street, and I'm in the back seat. My dad is driving, and my mom is in the passenger side of the car. And as we're pulling up almost to our house, there's these two shapes moving in the street, and I think it was my dad who went, "Oh my god!" And next thing I know, they've stopped the car. Oh, actually, my brother was in the car too. And as soon as he realized what happened, he said, "Oh, I can't take this." And he got out of the car and went inside. But one of our cats, who frequently was out and fighting with some of the other neighbor cats, it appeared that he had been chasing one of the cats out of our yard, and both of them had been hit by a truck or a vehicle of some type. And both were still alive. They were writhing in the street. And my mom jumped out and grabbed my cat, whose name was Whiskey. Not after the drink. His tail was always going a million miles an hour, so it was a whiskey tail. But so we called him Whiskey. And another kitty that was orange and white. And my mom got into the driver's side. My dad got into the back seat with the two cats, and I jumped into the hatchback compartment of the vehicle, and we started driving to the emergency animal hospital because it was after hours. And for the next 30 minutes, my dad did the best he could to try and help them. He'd been a Vietnam vet, so he was the most prepared out of any of us to offer some aid. And I was just in the back, and I was just down there, just in extreme distress. And one point, I couldn't take it. I could hear the cats struggling for breath, and I remember I looked up over the seat, and oh, actually, my dad said the other cat's gone, and that's when I looked up over the seat, and I could see the kitty on the vinyl chairs, and blood was. It looked like viscous Hawaiian punch. I just remember it. So it was just this deep, dark, and it was dark in the car anyway. This deep, dark, thick blood was just running out of that poor cat's mouth, and literally was laying in a pool of it. And um, we're continuing driving. My dad's doing everything he can for my cat. My cat is. I hear him convulsing and gasping, and right before we got to the animal hospital, he went quiet as well. Then we ran into the animal hospital, and I just remember the trail of blood on the light colored tiles from the damage. And they took him through a big door, and I don't know, 45 minutes later or whatever, they came back out and they just said, "There's nothing we could do. He was gone." And they went on to explain and said that his lungs had filled with blood. And I just remember in that moment realizing he had drowned in his own blood. And that was just super horrific. It was really, really difficult thing. I love this cat. He was my kitty and slept on the foot of my bed every night. And where it ties into what we're talking about today is I somehow got this idea into my head that I was never going to forgive myself for what happened. And logical sense would say, well, why did you feel a sense of responsibility? You didn't hit him, you didn't let him out. Somehow I got it into my head that I was never going to forgive myself. And I didn't for a very, very long time. And go ahead.
Can we go to and for the animal lovers, I know like this is like gripping because animals, the love that you have for animals. Yes, show us whiskey.
He's going
What?
after like a little piece of ham or something that my brother pulled out.
Yeah. Oh my God, what a beautiful cat.
And I could not look at these photos for over 30 years without being reduced to a crying, heaving PTSD mass.
So let's talk about that. So first when you're when you're driving in the car and you have these, obviously your cat, the other cat, you're going to the emergency room. Um and then when you discover that your cat is not going to make it, tell us about the emotions that you're experiencing after the fact, because of course like in the midst of something like that happening, it's just pure adrenaline. You're running just on adrenaline, so it's probably very chaotic. But the after effects of it, I want you to walk us through the different emotions that you're having and then how you get to this ownership of this is my fault and I'll never forgive myself. Take us on that emotional journey.
So I have very little recollection once we left the animal hospital. What actually happened after that? I have this vague memory of my dad burying him in the backyard, but my dad being by himself while we all watched from inside for some reason. I don't know. I actually don't even know if that's a real memory or a dream, or something I fabricated because I have no memory of it. Um, but we had a lot of cats, and a couple of them were not housebroken, and one of the cats was peeing on the foot of my bed, and he was the one who always slept on the foot of my bed. So in my childhood mind, I thought it was him, but in reality, the chance of it being him is very low because that's where he liked to sleep. It was probably one of the other ones coming in, but I didn't let him sleep on the foot of my bed for a few weeks leading up to this happening, and that was the catalyst for me. Just, oh, I didn't let him sleep on my bed, and because he was my best little buddy, he'd always sleep in the bed with me. And when I didn't let him do that, I twisted that into, in the trauma and the hurt of the moment, I twisted that into just never forgiving myself for not letting him sleep on the bed with me those last few weeks. Um, I missed school the next day. Um, I think, and you and I talk about this a lot in my writing, but I think a lot of my ability to feel in like maybe the normal way died with him that day. It was like it was so painful and so traumatic, and so I think a lot of my um, abilities to feel things got shut down when that happened. So
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that because you've been through a lot, right? You just talked about being born with a heart condition and, like being in the hospital as much as you were, being exposed to like your own mortality at such a young age. What about the experience with this cat caused you to go to such a numb state?
that I don't know. I really don't know, but it has allowed me to do things and respond to things and be in certain stressful, traumatic situations and keep a very level head. Um, I came home one night, this was maybe a year ago, and a little kitty had been hit in front of my house. And I don't know, it's 1 in the morning. I'd been performing that night. It's late and it's just starting to cloud up like it's going to rain. And I just said, you know what? This is the kind of thing I'm equipped to deal with now. And I put on some gloves and I went and he was laying in the street and I was petting him. And other than a clearly very badly broken back, he was in perfect condition. His little ears were just, and I just pet him right there. And then I picked him up and I carried him into the backyard and I put on a beautiful song. And I buried him at like 1:30 in the morning in the backyard, and just was petting him and then put him in the hole. And I don't know why I always put my hand over their face when I fill it in with the dirt, and don't let the dirt go onto their face until they're all the way under. Then I'll finally pull my arm out. And um, it's not a judgment or a criticism, but a lot of people wouldn't be able to. My belief, at least, is a lot of people wouldn't want to, or be able to, or have any desire to deal with that. And I just see it as something that needs to be handled. And I took care of him, and it was very sad. And I cried a little while I was putting him away, but he was such a beautiful little kitty. And um, so maybe it's allowed me to have certain experiences or respond in certain ways. So I've tried to turn whatever it is into a benefit to the world.
Yeah. When you said that after Whiskey died, or is it
Mhm.
Whiskey or Whiskers?
Whiskey.
Whiskey. Okay. So after Whiskey died, you said for 30 years it was so hard for you to look at photographs of Whiskey without like having such a deep emotional reaction. Why do you think it was that long? Like 30 years is a long time, especially, and we can all sit here and say it was just a cat, 30 years, that's a long to have that level of an emotional response. To the best of your ability, what would you think? Why did that elicit such a response for so long?
Oh, I can tell you exactly why. But I'm answering a different question in a way to do it. So I had gone to see a therapist, and just to talk about general life things, but that was one of the things that came up pretty early on. Um, and when I told her about it, I had to like completely disassociate to just almost like very textbook talk about what had happened. And she said the simplest little thing. First off, I never once was like, oh, I have PTSD. I never once, I'm a Gen Xer. We didn't get PTSD. Uh, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But yeah, we didn't have a lot of these things. So it's just, I had accepted that this is how I felt and this is how I reacted, the way you accept that you're right or left-handed, or that it was totally normal. I didn't even know there was something to fix. It was just an accepted part of life. If I see these, I'm going to be wrecked. And I would come across them. I keep them in a box, but whenever I'd go through old papers, or I'd come across them, it would hit me like a ton of bricks. I would just be absolutely incapacitated in grief. So she said this very simple thing. She said, a lot of times people who are suffering from PTSD are holding on to some guilt.
Mm.
That's all she said. She said a lot of times, well, she's probably said a lot of things, but that's the thing that unlocked me. And I was out on a bicycle ride maybe 2 days later, and I was thinking about it, and I thought, wow, is that all it is? And I realized I had said, I'll never forgive myself, and I had not. I was feeling this terrible guilt, and it just kind of unlocked, or it was like flipping a switch. It was a conscious decision I made. It wasn't even an emotional decision, it was a logical decision. And I thought back to the cat and how he loved me so much and I'd loved him so much, and how he would not want me to be sad and distraught and to look at photos of him and be in a state of terrible grief. In fact, I wasn't allowing myself to celebrate anything about his life because his last hour on this earth was so bad. I'd reduced his entire existence and my entire relationship with him to 1 hour of his terrible trauma. So I thought about it for the rest of that bike ride, and I thought, gosh, is it that easy? You just flip that switch, you realize you haven't forgiven yourself. And it sounds so overly simplistic, but I got home and I just put my bike where it belongs. I went into my room. I opened this box, which is the box it's been in for I don't even know how long. And I took them out, and for the first time in probably 30, probably 33 or 34 years, instead of totally melting down and crying and snot dripping on my face and no sense of dignity whatsoever, I was able to actually look at it and go, what a beautiful boy.
Yeah.
And what a precious little soul he was. And to this day, whenever somebody posts on Facebook or whatever and they've lost a pet or something, I always say the exact same thing. I say, "What a beautiful little girl," or "What a beautiful little boy."
Yeah.
Um, and and I don't know. It was a total transformation, and not only did I come to the realization I had PTSD, but it was solved almost at the same time. And it took me a very, very, very long time to write that story. I worked on it for years, on and off, and um, slowly but surely. I never had a reason to write it other than look at this terrible thing that happened. And it wasn't until that that realization came around that I suddenly had an ending for the story that was worthy of what it had been.
Yeah.
So,
When you go back to that entire scenario from the experience to 30 years of essentially living with PTSD and then that one switch, what would you say is like your most valuable takeaway from that entire experience? Like what makes that moment so valuable to you?
um, well, the healing was incredible. Just to have that monumental of a shift that fast.
Hmm.
Maybe I was just ready for it. Maybe I was ready to hear it. Maybe enough. Maybe I'd beat myself up for long enough that I was ready to let it go. I don't know, but it just the power in it was, or my hope that the power in it is that anyone else who hears the story or reads the story or reads any of these stories that I've written, not all of them are like that, but um, that there's some takeaway. And you and I've talked about this. To me, if I tell a story, if I write it out, um, Amy knows, but for anyone, I write a lot of short stories, and I'm now learning to transition that into longer form books. But if I'm going to tell that story, and at the end I go, well, I guess he had to be there. Well, that's a story that was entertaining for the people who were there and knew all the people. But there are other stories where there's a universal thread that everyone can take something away. And I've tried very hard to only focus my energies onto stories that anyone, no matter whether they know the people or were in the scenario or have any interest in the subject of whatever was happening at the moment, there's a takeaway for everyone and some life lesson. So I really try to focus my, it's allegorical nonfiction, is how I can best describe it.
Yeah. When it comes to this story specifically, um, and you're because what I hear so much is the like acceptance of letting something go that is very special to you, but it's also a almost like you felt a responsibility, right? So, what has this essentially taught you about like the responsibility in relationships and also like letting go, like the transition of letting go of something special in your life and letting it go with peace, right? Like now you're able to look at the picture and say, what a beautiful boy. But it's like so many of us can't get to that because it's like not being able to accept the leaving of that existence in your life or letting go of your responsibility or lack thereof and that being leaving your life. Like how has that helped you when it comes to those concepts?
So I'm going to try to answer your question, but I have to actually go into another part of that story.
Please.
And it actually happened 2 or 3 months later. My mom and I were driving on a very busy road. And again, this is a couple, you actually said earlier, oh, but as much as you loved it, it's a cat. This second part is what I think was just the absolute nuclear bomb into my emotional psyche with all this. So I'd said my dad was there. He's a Vietnam vet. He handled everything. I was just, I was a bystander with no ability to impact other than to just be there in a state of horror. So 2 or 3 months later, we're driving down Foothill Boulevard in Fontana, California, and I see a dog on the side of the road that's been hit. And I tell my mom, there's a dog, she's been hit. And she goes, well, she's probably already gone. I said, no, she's not. So my mom pulled around. And this time it was just the two of us. So I'm in the passenger seat and we open the back door, and the dog comes again. Trauma warning. Um, the dog, her back legs don't work at all. We open the back door, and she's trying to pull herself into the car, but her back legs don't work. So my mom, who's a big woman, she reaches back, she grabs the dog by the scruff and pulls her into the back seat behind the passenger side. Again, it's nighttime, and boom, we're not that far from where the whiskey incident had happened. So we're back to the emergency hospital. This time I crawled into the back. I'm 9, and I'm trying to do what my dad did. And I just remember her teeth were all broken, and she had blood and spittle dripping from her, and her back legs are just twisted under her like a pretzel in a way that no, she had to be in just unbelievable pain. And she smelled like oil and rubber and asphalt and blood. Like I could smell the metallic. Again, I apologize, everyone. I could smell the metal. I can smell it right now when I think back to it. I can smell that metallic. It's like it's permanently on my tongue. And as I was examining her and trying and torn between the revulsion of wanting to hug her and help, but revolt like she looked like something out of Night of the Living Dead or the what's the zombie show? How am I
Well, you're
blanking?
talking to the wrong person. The Walking Dead?
Yeah, The Walking Dead. Yeah, she
Okay, I
looked like
only know that because other people are into it. Yes.
right. She looked like one of the characters out of The Walking Dead. She's just covered in gore. And as this was happening, all of a sudden we made eye contact, and I realized she was looking right into my eyes, and there was trust. Despite just the unbelievable pain she was in, we had taken her off the street where she was alone with just cars whizzing by, and she didn't know where we were going, but we just had this incredible moment of trust. And again, I'm 9. I'm absolutely helpless. This incredible sense of helplessness. We're racing to the emergency hospital, and I remember saying to my mom, "I could smell the blood," and she's like, "I know, honey, I know." Um, and then again, I'm just telling the story, but she starts going into convulsions, and I think, "Oh God, this is what they do when they're about to die," because that's what had happened to the cats. And she's convulsing, and I'm literally waiting for her to die right there next to me. And then she vomited her internal organs up, and something landed on the seat that was like like a chicken breast, but just that dark organy meat looking kind of thing. And I just got, God, how is she alive? I just you see like things in war movies, and you just go, how is that person, like, how is this animal alive? It's unbelievable. So we got to the emergency hospital, same thing. They take her back through the big white door, and I'm just waiting, like, yep, I know how this ends. And then the doctor came out and said, "What do you want to do?" I was like, "What do you mean? What do you want to do? She's got to be a goner." And he's just like, "Is it your dog?" And my mom explained the situation. No, we just found her. And he said, "Well, we've got her somewhat stabilized. I mean, we would have to do emergency surgeries right now. I can tell you she's going to need multiple surgeries. She may never walk again. It's going to be a fortune. Her recovery is not guaranteed." Like the gravity of he did not pull his punches of the gravity of what it would. He's all, "You want to do this? Maybe we can do it, but understand." And my mom turned and looked at me and said, "What do you want to do?" And I knew in that moment she was putting the entire weight of it on me to say, she knew I'd had no power when whiskey was dying, and she let me decide. And I don't know, it was very clear to me. I looked up at the doctor and I said, "Let her go."
Yeah.
Like she was in such incredible, terrible, terrible pain. And I couldn't imagine putting her through that. So I said, "Let her go." And the way I describe it is I've been an adult ever since.
Mm.
That was the last day of my childhood.
I think it's so fascinating. So I'm gonna make the connection, and you tell me if I'm on, because I
You usually
know
are.
I know, like, the thing that is so incredible to me is that every time I interview people and they tell me these stories, and it's like these really dark moments in their lives, but then it's like knowing who you are and knowing like how you service the world, it's like you were being prepared, because everything about you right now, like you own chickens, like you love animals, and
Yeah.
you also just how nurturing and kind and caring you are to people, and how much people like give you their darkness.
Mm,
Does that make sense? It's like how much like people are they feel safe to give you like dark secrets and like to give you details of their life that someone else might be like, "Whoa, too much." Like even the story you're talking about, the kitty, right? And you being able to hold that kitty in the last moments of its life and love on that kitty. It's like to see the man that you are after having those experiences and being able to sit with these animals in a really painful last moment, and to know that some people couldn't handle that. Some people are repulsed by that, right? Like, I don't want to be there during the final hours, or I don't want to be there through the pain, right? But it's almost like that seems to be the start or maybe the trend of you being okay, and also almost being chosen as this special individual that gets to meet people either at their last moment or at their darkest moment, and you're able to be present and you're able to offer love, whatever that looks like in that moment.
yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah. Well, you see the moment when people say something that they're expecting is going to like totally shock you, or and I'm like, mhm.
Yeah.
And you're not shocked or horrified or mortified. And I've had a lot of people talk to me about suicide because when they talk about it, I don't give them whatever response they're expecting to get. Um, and I just sit with them in that. It's like, oh, okay, well, how are you feeling? And again, I'm not a licensed professional or anything, but I think people who talk about that sometimes get a response of panic, and people want to like do something, and they're like, no, no, I'm just trying to like talk to you. And I don't necessarily try to do something that I can't explain it, but you're right. People do tell me very heavy, dark things, and it doesn't evoke whatever response would normally shut that conversation down. I'm in it. Whatever we're getting into, like let's get into it.
Yeah.
So I
I
don't know if I
want,
answered very well.
yeah. That was perfect. I just literally wanted you to agree with me and say, "Of course you're right, Amy."
Oh, well, of course, the fastest way to win an argument, right? You're right.
I love it. I want you to thinking about the idea of like PTSD and forgiving yourself, right? Or even just coming to the state of realizing how much you might have locked yourself in this state of constant um, beating yourself up or constant guilt, right? But then 30 years later, it's a switch. So I want you to speak directly to the audience and really to someone or to people who might have a really traumatic situation in their life that still brings up like um, that same moment when you're looking at something and feeling completely out of control, but also feeling like you could have made it different. And
Mm,
because you didn't, now that moment only offers pain, or that moment only offers fear. It's something that is scary or avoidant. I want you to talk to someone who might be in a similar situation, and whatever you're feeling, giving them some sort of value based on who you are and based on your experiences in the way that only you can.
mm. So here's the challenge. And there's a saying that summarizes it so well, and that is what's right is what's left after. you've done things wrong.
Mm.
We don't. So we oftentimes have to go through the thing to learn the lesson. Um, and actually, that's one of the reasons I write so many of these stories. My hope is that somebody might read some of these stories and avoid having to make the mistake to learn the lesson, or at the very least, when they make a mistake that's somewhat ethereally similar, they'll think of that story and go, ah, and it'll sink in, because so often we can find ourselves making the same mistake over and over and over and not know why and not understand or even realize there's something to change. Like, I didn't even realize there was anything to change with my PTSD. But I think a big part of it is just realizing that you have to make the mistakes to learn. Um, we learn so much more from our mistakes than we do from our victories and successes. Victories and what's that saying? Like, if somebody compliments you 10 times, you might vaguely assimilate some part of it, but somebody does one criticism and like, what's a nickname they hit you with in elementary school? I was Skinny Bone Joan. Um, they made fun of my ears. Like,
Oh, I was Typhoon because I was very overweight. And it made no sense. It literally made no sense. But I know Kevin Stewart
mhm.
sat right in front of me. Spelling word was typhoon, turned around, said Amy's a typhoon. And I was wrecked ever since. It was
and
like fifth grade.
and here we are, how many years later?
Oh, God, almost 30 years.
And boom, you can go right back to it.
Yeah.
So it's like nursery rhymes. You hear the first line of a nursery rhyme you haven't heard since you were a child, and you know the next line. Same thing. These things are so ingrained. And what I realized is, I thought kids were making fun of me, like saying, "Oh, your ears are big." Maybe they were just, kids just observe. They look and go, "The wall is blue. Your ears are big." And here I am assimilating it for life,
Yeah.
and then they're just like, "This desk is heavy." They're just talking out loud about the world they see.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe they mean it maliciously sometimes, but I think we can so quickly and easily assimilate these things and be scarred by them, and carry it with us. And I've got one story slash chapter I'm working on. And it's called "Check Your Baggage at the Door," and it's one of the hardest things to do, is trying to recognize what things you're bringing from previous experiences or relationships, and how hard it is to just drop those at the door and come into that relationship fresh,
Yeah.
or whatever situation it is, a work environment, or having a pet. Like I have cats today, and I don't let the experience with whiskey and with that dog prevent me from having pets today. It just shapes your experience with them.
Yeah. I love that. Bill, thank you so much for being with us here today. Thank you for sharing such an incredible story and so vulnerably shared. And as I said, I knew you wouldn't disappoint. You're one of the best storytellers because Bill is about to come out with some books. We know it's coming soon, so it's super, super exciting with more of these incredible stories with a lot of lessons that are involved with them. But thank you again for joining us today. Thank you for everyone who is listening. Please comment, please share. And if this story has impacted you in any way, I really encourage you to reach out to Bill and just let him know, because sometimes we don't even know the impact that our story has on others. And I think there's value in consuming those stories, but there's also value in sharing how much those stories have helped. So thank you once again, and see you all next time on For Your Story, For Your Life.
Thanks, Amy.